name is Summer. Today, what I want to talk about is my Kundalini awakening. I have to try to reference this in a way that I would understand back in the day, because I didn't even know what that word even meant. Nobody ever taught it to me. Nobody ever said like what that kind of experience was. And from my perspective, my experience was completely different than what a lot of people talk about. Most of what happened in my awakening experience, how do I put this? It reshaped my life perspective about everything. And from most people, what I hear, it's more like something specific changed, or almost like it was like an interruption in what they were doing, and eventually they just got about like living it. For me, it was not like that at all. God, it was like experiencing raw power, and it just seemed to come out of like nowhere. Honestly, there was a girl I was with at the time that kind of helped bring this about. It was a relationship that was incredibly confronting to me about who I was, and specifically whether or not I was really a good person or not, to the point where I started to act on everything I could think of doing to try to be something I thought I wasn't. This is what inevitably led to a collapse inside of myself, a collapse that eventually revealed a life force energy I never knew was possible. And like I said, this has to do with falling in love with yourself, because everything I was doing up to that point, where I finally let go, everything until that point was about trying to force myself to be things I considered, and people who were reflecting to me at that point considered I wasn't. And so I tried my best, especially with her and what was going on with my life at that point, to try to hold everything together. And the more I did, the more everything fell apart. So I tried even harder, and it reinforced that sense of guilt. It reinforced that sense of like awfulness, like of negativity, of wrongness about myself, that I was evil. That was my confrontation at that point. And eventually I got to this point where it was impossible to hold on any longer, to try to like balance all the balls that I was trying to keep up. And eventually this single thought appeared in my mind that said, why not just let it fall apart? So I was putting myself under so much stress to try to be what I thought I was supposed to be in this life. I'd gotten to the point where the craziness of the thought like appealed to me, like in such a way I just thought, yeah, like I've tried everything else, you know what? I'm just gonna go with that. And so every single day from that point on, I started to just let myself just go. And I would face the outcome of whatever would happen. And little by little, it started to open this sense of like confidence inside of me, where I didn't realize it at the time, but there was like energy growth that I was allowing to just become. All it took was like a degree, just a degree of a shift. Like I relate this to how telescopes see like a whole like portion of space. If you just change the tilt of where that telescope is looking, even just a degree, it's looking at a whole other area of space. And it was like that. Just the smallest degree shift in my perspective opened up so much light and so much clarity for the first time in my life, that eventually I just let it all go. I just said, I don't care anymore. From my perspective, it was like letting myself collapse into myself that revealed more of myself than I had ever seen. I had never been trained to do this. I had not really interacted with any mentors or teachers or anything like that. It just kind of came out of my life experience. But because it came out in a regular, like Americanized, like cheeseburgers and cigarettes kind of way, it changed like my perspective on everything about life. But so much to the point where I could literally see the difference from when I was missing this piece of information, this energy, I could see the difference. Because I'd never experienced this before, and because it really awakened like me physically to things I never even knew were possible, I started to become like angry. I remember at the time first waking up, my first questions were like, where's the government involved in this stuff? Like, how come the government isn't like aware of this stuff? How come there's no prepositioned like education? How come there's no authority structure on Kundalini in like the population? How come there's no medical understanding of Kundalini? How come there's no understanding in just like a basic generic way? Because basic generic is what I was born into. I wasn't born into like some fancy like family. Like I was born like into a really standard kind of like just normal middle class like suburb kind of family. Nothing too fancy, nothing too poor. Like just regular, just in every way, just honestly, nothing special at all. So that was my first question. I'm like, where is the authority structure in all this? How come there isn't like people who are specialists in this? How come it isn't part of the school system? How come it isn't part of the government understanding? How come it isn't part of like common everyday conversation? How come nobody knows about this stuff? How can this thing be a real physical thing and there's nobody here to talk about it? It's so raw, like in so many ways. Like it's so shocking to me. And I think maybe people just probably won't understand what I'm talking about because they're like, what is the Kundalini experience, right? Like, what are you referencing? Let's put it this way. Most of everything we do in our life, day by day, is pushing against our natural flow. We're pushing against ourselves. You won't notice this because you're so irrevocably trained down to the very core of your being. You don't realize that you're doing it. It's just hard work, right? That's just part of a regular day. We're so trained unconsciously that we accept it on a day-to-day basis. But everything about that is in total antithesis to the free energy that exists in a Kundalini experience. And yeah, I'm using that word specifically because it has to do with like what people are talking about in the New Age community about hidden free energy devices. Your body is one of those devices. Your body is built to give you free energy. Everything about your training suppresses it, redirects it, misunderstands it, creates a negative out of a positive. It makes it a burden to have that energy inside yourself. You are, in a sense, your own government suppression of your own experience of like free energy, free love comes out of you. You're just like they are. I am too, we all are. We live backwards to how our natural design expresses itself. And because we have that free energy always available to us, we have the freedom to create whatever we want. It's just we don't live like that. And we haven't for the whole of human history. It's a lot to kind of get through. That's primarily what I remember when I finally found the word Kundalini and I hear people talking about it. They always refer to it like almost like a burden, almost like some belligerent child or something like that they have to take care of. Like something that just wants to go everywhere and do its own thing. That's not at all what it is. It's your own natural energy. Even the way talking about it in that separated way, like it is you. It's not like some foreign like parasite or something like that invading you. It's who you are. So I came up with this. And I came up with the understanding of why there isn't those things in society. That's why I'm making these videos. Because like we usually figure out, because we are backwards people, we figure things out backwardsly. If you're complaining about something, the chances are you probably are that thing that you're complaining about not having in the world. Because that's what I'm not happy about, there not being pre-existing my experience. Because why wouldn't this be a part of like the central infrastructure of humankind? Why? People would suggest that it's some conspiracy, that the government conspiracy or whatever wants to control that information or whatnot. But like from who? From themselves? Like, are they not having that experience? Because if you're having that experience and central in that experience yourself, you can't control yourself like that. So if you try to do that to anyone else, it's just going to injure you. I've literally had these physical experiences too. It's like when you enter that experience, if I felt like extreme anger, frustration, fear, or something like that, I would literally push myself out of my center, and I would physically, emotionally, psychologically experience pain, because the joy comes from within. So those people who might be suppressing information or technology or whatnot, they're not in it themselves. They don't have that experience to reference. People are not taught in society to develop themselves into more of who they are. They're taught to suppress who they are and replace it with kind of like compartmentalized versions of what would naturally exist if we empowered our natural essence. Kundalini cuts through all of that stuff. Kundalini is the life force energy. Everything that powers everything is life force. It's like love powers everything. But then how do we exist in a world filled with fear? How? But that's also why people see it as alien. Because people are being trained from birth essentially to fight themselves. So then I came up with this idea that at a certain point, the person who would be an authority on Kundalini would be someone who would be a principle of it, someone who would be the very embodiment of it themselves. The person in my research that would fit that would be essentially a master, like a Christ, because they would be the full embodiment of where Kundalini goes eventually. But from my own experience, that person would also have to be recognized as being alien to humanity. They would not have a principle of authority because all the systems that exist in the world today, for their best interest, for all the good that they do, for all the good that they intend to do, they're all built negative. They're all built in contradiction to that nature of Kundalini, that nature of life force. They cut it off. So by the time there could even be someone maturing naturally within the system to become a full-fledged master of Kundalini, it's beaten, bent, misplaced. It has to go around the bend until it becomes something that can kind of fit in some weird way in society that is not the full natural growth into being who we naturally are. We do not invite the experience of actual positivity into our world because we're not actually expressing it in our nature. We're against our own Christness. We're against it, and we teach each other against it. We look towards children to bring us joy. But at the same time, we don't let that joy be an authority onto ourselves and our lives to train us how we can bring mature versions of that natural joy into expression. The most we do is suppress it, bend it, shape it away so it can fit into the society that doesn't contain it. We value more survival over happiness. We value survival over life, like actual living. Because none of us are really living that much excitement, because that's what would be if we each followed our natural childlike hunger to experience the joys that we particularly find joyful in the world. So the reason, to answer my own question, why there's no authority is like saying, why are there no Christs that are part of our government structure? Like if we have people who are principal authorities, like on life and things like that, imagine institutionalizing, in a sense, a Christ to empower the perception of how we need to, interact with the world. We would agree so far as we can control them. But once they no longer represent that frequency of how we live our lives, we would ask them to leave or force them to. Not that they could be forced, but they would never be invited in by us. And so they stay a little bit out of the mix, so to speak. None of us are aware of Christ that actually physically exists. We can't turn on the evening news and see the Christ's actions and what they're doing. The closest things we'll have are like people like Eckhart Tolle or something like that, or people channeling Christ or people of that nature. But we can't actually have the physical, breathing, living Christ moving in and out of our society without, crucifying them. And don't say it wouldn't happen in this time, because it would happen. I mean, Christ would be crucified by the Christians in this time period, because he would represent things that were too challenging to their adopted form of like religious hierarchy, which more reflects the mentality that was trying to control Christ back in the day. It's like the same story just continually repeats itself over and over and over again because it's negative. And so we all self-destruct. I mean, if you think about this, Jesus sacrificed himself, but then whole troves of people went to war over Jesus. Religious wars. It's like a contradiction in terms, but that's the way we perceive things. We don't recognize that childlike love inside of each and every one of ourselves. We can't believe any longer that such a thing could actually manifest, physically speaking, in our lives. Such a thing as, like Bashar has talked about, living fairy tales. That each to ourselves, we're each living fairy tales, where our own fairy tales come true. We don't know ourselves like that. We belittle, we demean ourselves. We push ourselves away. We don't allow our natural expression to really grow and really become more of itself so that it can show the world how incredible we are. We suppress. And a large part of why people are not having those experiences is because of that sleeping, raging zombie-like behavior that happens to fill the space of not actually having meaningfulness express itself out in the world. And that meaningfulness comes from really being in nature who your natural self is by design. Those are my thoughts on my Kundalini awakening and how really what I want most is, I hope, what I can bring to each one of you, at least in the very early beginning stages, some discussion about what life really is and what we really are and how things actually exist. My name's Summer. If you like these videos, please share, subscribe, comment down below. Let me know what you think. Let me know about your experiences. And have a great day.